Okay.
All right, so we're joined from Raleigh, North Carolina by the wonderful and one of the hottest young female architects in the United States, Zakiya Wiggins. We are in the architecture construction career cluster here at Velma Jackson. I've got a room full here with me, and we're recording this for our friends at Rosa Scott, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Let me just start this.
Thank you.
All right, so I am Zakiya Wiggins. I'm from Cary, North Carolina. I currently live out in Fuquay and work in downtown Raleigh, so I'm all over the triangle. I've been practicing for, I guess, 6 years now, in May. And so I'm happy to be here and share a little bit about my journey and what it's like to go through the process of becoming an architect. So first, to be a licensed architect, it requires 5 to 6 years of education after K-12. And so I went to NC State for undergrad, and then I went to Morgan State for grad school. And I could talk a little bit more about that when we get into Q&A. Then on top of that, you have to have some work experience. So you get a little practical education. And so throughout those 3 years, you're tracking hours in different sections of experience. And then it equals up to about 3,740 hours. They're usually, people end up with a little bit more than that. And then the final step is taking the AREs, which are the architect registration exams, and there are 6 of those. But there is a lot of support along the way. So I talked a little bit about NC State. Being from Cary, it made sense to me to stay in state and go to a local school. And so this NC State was about 15 minutes from home. So I'll show you, I think just like 1 or 2 projects from my time there. So this one project, when you get into architecture and you're in school, you're thinking like, oh, I'm about to design buildings. And it's like, whoa, like, wait a minute. First, we have to talk about like some design fundamentals. And so this was a project that we actually took a painting and abstracted, and the highlights and the lowlights of the painting, the shadows became the depth and the topography. And so that was kind of the landscape that we used to work with. And then this project was a museum. And so what are some different gallery spaces? How are you playing with light? How does your building still bring some of those aspects of the painting back into it? And these are some of the typical materials you use in school, just kind of usually like what's available, but cardboard tends to be easy to work with, and basswood is really like a nice presentation material. The second project, since NC State is a land grant institution and has a farm, we were looking at a dairy farm and how can we make the teaching dairy farm a little bit more modernized, a little bit more up to date. So using kind of simple forms here. This is not like a really flashy building or anything like that, but you have the second floor level that allowed students to view the animals without necessarily interrupting them, and also allow the doctors on the first floor to do the same. So just thinking about everything, that every building has to be designed by someone. And so, yeah, whether it's simple or complex.
Before a shovel ever goes in the ground, you got to have a plan.
Yeah, you got to have a plan. After NC State, I went to Morgan State, which Morgan State is at HBCU in Maryland. There, I spent 2 years working on my MArch. And so this project here was my thesis, and it was the Veterans Ability Center. And so when you think about accessibility, we're often thinking about maybe somebody temporarily hurt their foot and they're in a boot, or maybe they're in a wheelchair. But I wanted to look at what does kind of the extreme end of that look like. And so veterans that have gone out to war, possibly coming back without limbs, or having, some type of mental trauma. And so this building looked at what are the social, mental, and physical aspects of healing. And so some of the aspects I wanted to incorporate are light and water. privacy, ways to either walk or run, and that rehabilitation of the body as well as the mind. So let's see.
And also having to stay ADA compliant on top of all that, because I'm sure
Also,
a federal thing,
having to
and you got to look
stay.
at state at the state compliance laws as well. So all that has to come into play in the design.
Right. So this first floor had the swimming pool, and so swimming pool is kind of like the really low packed way
Yeah.
of starting rehabilitation. So it's like at the ground level. Then as you're moving up, you're able to walk around each floor, and then this ramp, this red ramp, was more of like a running track. And so this project, even though it's fictional, but it was located in downtown Baltimore.
That's awesome.
So it also became a community aspect. So there, it included, I don't think I have images of it, but it included a basketball court, and the track will be open to the public. There was also a couple community spaces that people could come in and use. So it's not just imposing on the neighborhood, but actually a part of it. A few more images. The bottom image, when you get to the top, there's more light. And then these are some of the different types of images that we need to produce as architects to really give a full idea of what the project is. And so on the top, we have the top left, the south elevation. This is what's considered a rendered elevation. So you can see how the building is bending based on the light and the shadows. On the top, actually that was top left. On the top right, we have what's called a section perspective. And so you're cutting through part of the building, and that's looking at the same direction. So you're cutting through and you're able to see and, you know, and with some dimension. And so the side I cut through here had some office spaces and small gym spaces. Then in the middle left, section BD, these are construction drawings. So this would be more of a schematic design, early construction drawing, just to get the idea of what are the different levels, where are the different floors located. And then on the right side, this is kind of the more advanced version of a section perspective, to really get the full idea of how the systems are connected. This would be an image that at some point had mechanical systems, and it's how you would coordinate with all of your engineers.
Yeah, and now while you're doing this, are you also showing what type of materials will be used as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So showing what type of materials will be used and where those may interact.
Yeah, and I think
So
it's really.
certification.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I think that's really cool. If you showed the how the nighttime thing here. You know, one of your videos you
Yeah.
talked about, even if people don't use it, people want to be proud of it when they see it. So you know where you had this located was right on the highway. So people would drive by and say, "Look, here in Baltimore, we have this beautiful building." And that could attract other buildings to be built near it. So I think that's a forgotten aspect of design, is because yes, you want to please the client, you want to please the people that'll use it, but the community wants to have pride in buildings that look good.
Absolutely. So certifications, even after you're done with school, you can still kind of keep learning always. There's new things coming out. We were talking about accessibility earlier, and there's also sustainability. So getting back to materials and the importance of those, it's really the baseline of making a sustainable building. What materials are you using to construct with? And then what are you using to close the building in? So I am LEED accredited, and that means, you know, we're looking at what's an integrative process. Is the location conducive to transportation? Are you having to go miles and miles to get to public transit, or can you just walk down the block to catch a bus? And that's really important when you think about who has access to a building, and how that building is really connected to its environment. And there are a ton more. Another one is WELL certification. I'm not WELL certified, but that one looks more at the occupants of the building instead of the building materials. But how does the building impact your personal wellness? This is a project that I worked on um, when I was at Clark Nexon. I did some of the construction administration for it.
Wow.
And so that part, well, I guess I'll talk about construction administration a couple more slides. But what that's like, so you have the design phase, and then eventually the building has to get built, and somebody has to check that it's getting built the way that you intended for it to be. And so that's going through and having tons of checklists and looking at, first looking at the structure when it's coming up, then you're checking the drywall, you're checking that you'll have your mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and structural engineers. Every trade comes in to check their own thing, but as an architect, you're still responsible that everything comes together correctly as intended. And so I worked on some of the finishes for this, making sure that they were installed correctly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because it's not just sitting behind a desk and designing, even though that's a huge part. You get to go out and wear the hard hat and get to see and see it as it comes along.
I think it's probably the most fun part besides design. You have an in between phase where you're just working, but it's really great to see it come live. So now getting into kind of what do I actually do? What is kind of the day to day, walking you through that. And so it starts with the building plans and sites. You need a site to put the building on, and you need a plan to build it. And so you really start there. And then we create drawings on the computer. I primarily use Revit. In my job, some places use AutoCAD. If you're more doing like civil or landscape, they tend to use AutoCAD more, or the engineers. Construction site visits. And so that's when the project is under construction. And that could be, depending on the size of the project, a couple years or a few years. And so you spend X amount of time designing, and then the rest of the time is in construction. We also have client meetings to discuss design choices, and that's everywhere from discussing the plans to discussing the materials, where they want to have concrete or carpet or vinyl, what the paint colors are.
Wow.
As you can see in this picture on the right, that wood wall took a lot of coordination. I didn't work on that, but it took a lot of coordination. So you have to talk to the client about, do we want to extend this all the way up? Because it's obviously a high price item.
Yeah.
And so selecting finishes and materials is another part of that. And we often work with interior designers too. They're part of the design team, depending on how big the project is, and they'll help make some of those decisions. And so design, this is actually a project I'm working on right now. I do K-12. And so we have an elementary school in Cary, where I grew up, which is nice. And so this is what the current exterior is planned to look like, but this rendering at the bottom right is more of an idea of what the inside could look like. So we're still working with the client to decide what those patterns will be, what the flooring material will be, what the color scheme is for the school. And we'll go back and change things based on their feedback, and then have another meeting to present the new ideas. So it's really a back and forth process together. And we talked about construction administration. These are just some pictures from the outside being under construction still, while we had already started looking at the inside materials.
Wow, that is a beautiful building.
Yes, it's an engineering building at NC State's campus.
Oh, wow.
It's a weird hall. And you can on the bottom left, let's see, bottom right, it's facing Hunt Library. So Hunt Library was also done by the same firm, and so they wanted to have the buildings have some type of communication with each other, not be completely different sitting on the same site.
Yeah.
So I have the NC State requirements here, but this is kind of general and can apply to many schools. Um, so the how to apply, you have an application fee. You'll need an official transcript from your high school, and letters of reference are typical. And you'll also need a portfolio for most programs. And so, and portfolio requirements can change from school to school. But the good news is that they don't have to be architecture images that you include in your portfolio. It can really just be anything to show your creativity, to show where your interests are. They really want to get to know you as a person, and see what you're personally bringing. You don't have to have all the answers coming in. And so this isn't my portfolio, but it's kind of an example of stuff that I had in mind, which was photography and sculpture and paintings. And they weren't all, super good, but you kind of give what you have. And the sooner you know that you're interested in applying, the sooner you can start doing that work. One of the organizations that I'm involved in is DIVERSIFY Architecture. And so DIVERSIFY Architecture is a new nonprofit. It's been around for just a little over 2 years. And the goal is in the name. And so part of the ways that we do that is having after school clubs that have activities that engage in architecture. We have architects come out to the schools and work with teachers to facilitate those. And it's year-long clubs typically. And so we provide the entire curriculum
Wow.
and all of the materials for that, as well as a stipend for the teacher in order to run those programs. And then DA Camps is just a part of the website that brings resources from all over the country to kind of post in one place for parents and students to access who want to engage with more architecture organizations maybe over the summer. So some of the ones listed on the website are Chicago Mobile Makers, NOMA Project Pipeline, and the Hip Hop Architecture Camp.
Wow.
And I think I have one more slide. So I am the president of NC NOMA. And so NOMA is the National Organization of Minority Architects. And I'm over the North Carolina chapter. I have been for about a year and a half. And so this is my final year. And so in that, I've been working on Project Pipeline since we started it back in 2019. And so that's one of the programs listed on DA's website. And it's something that we have every summer, as well as many other chapters around the country. So our first year we had 8 students, and second year 34. The third year was a regional online camp, and so I think we had about 100 students across the region. 2020 we did a hybrid, and this year we're hoping to be back fully in person.
That's awesome.
So typically that's a week long or maybe 4 days, and we have a different project every summer. You're able to.
And they have one of these in Mississippi as well.
Okay, great. So able to create those and just connect with other students and deepen your interests. And that concludes my presentation.
And some of that stuff you do is so cool. It's just amazing. Now, before I get to the students' questions, I did have a couple of things I wanted to ask about, and I asked you this last time, but I really want to hear. NC State, very similar to Mississippi State. It's a land grant, has the farm, all that stuff. They also have the architect program, and then you went to an HBCU for grad school. So, talk a little bit about the pros and cons of both, because they both offer such great opportunities, but they are very different in the way and their culture and their atmosphere. So talk a little about the PWI moving into the HBCU.
Okay. Yes. So I think that they were two very different experiences. For me, I think that the going to NC State was certainly a personal or a financial decision, as well as I like the atmosphere. It was close to home. Um, Being there, I would say comparing the two just project wise, they have two different kind of design philosophies. And so that's something, a term that's thrown around like in design school, like how do you see the world through architecture, basically, is what that means. And so some of the projects I did at NC State were more about transportation and education and maybe facility use. I think they had like a airport studio for your senior year.
Wow.
Um, some of the projects that I did at Morgan State were a lot more community based. And so we talked more about like, how are you giving back to the community? What are the facilities that are open for public use? Looking more at museums. And although my thesis was open to anything, and so a lot of people explored healthcare and their thesis and ideas like that. In terms of studio culture, I think that Morgan really provided me with kind of a family atmosphere that I never experienced. I didn't even know was a part of the architecture experience at some point in undergrad. Um, so I kind of think that was the difference, just being surrounded by people that I could relate to more in my grad school experience than at NC State.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, one thing I always say is that, HBCU, historically Black doesn't mean exclusively Black.
Right.
And Morgan State is a phenomenal school, and they have a very diverse student body, and a lot of international, and also a lot of international. Now, and one thing, and I'm glad you mentioned this too, because obviously we like to talk about college choices. So even if somebody doesn't even care about architecture, a lot of times it can be a good bet to go to the local school. Just because it's not far
Mhm.
from home, that can be a very good financial decision. Because we have Jackson State here right down the road, and a lot of kids say, "Well, I don't want to go there; it's too close to home." But with the rising cost of tuition, that could be a very, very smart decision.
Yes. I agree. And I also like to point out that I met a lot of students at Morgan who had gone to community college first before they came to Morgan. Morgan had a kind of partnership with Anne Arundel Community College, and they had a good transition program from that school over to the university that allowed you to not have to repeat too many classes or add too much extra time to how long it took to get your degree. And some of those students were the strongest students, in the class. And so definitely don't let anyone shame you out of going towards community college before heading to a university and having a different path in your education.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mississippi does a great job of that as well with their ACT scholarships. You can get a full tuition at a local community college here with a 20 on the ACT, and they have a pipeline into these universities. And what I always tell people, and that's a great point you made as well, these community colleges want you to go to the 4-year college. It makes them, it really helps
Absolutely.
their reputation. So they want you to get there. So they aren't trying to hold you back. That's a great point. Now also, we'd be remiss, with this being the beginning of Black History Month. Obviously, and you have diversified architecture. It is not, in the last few years, it really taken off. I know we talked about it last time. 15 years ago, there were not a lot of female architects and obviously not a lot of Black architects, but in the last few years, that has changed drastically, probably more so than any other.
Yeah.
So, what type of pushback did you get starting out that maybe a white male would not have gotten in the architecture field?
I think that it actually started with my freshman year. And so part of that is having good foundation, having good, friends, surrounding yourself with people that can reinstill um, your value in you. I think some of the pushback I received was actually just being ignored. And so I found myself not getting as much attention my freshman studio with my projects as I'm developing it, and then being critiqued harshly when it's time to present, although I have been given no feedback. So I think that was kind of my first realization that, this wasn't really what I expected it to be. But I honestly didn't know going into school what the stats were, that there weren't a lot of Black architects, or um, because I had grown up in an area that it just it seemed like what I was used to seeing in some of my classes already. Um, so I actually didn't become more aware of the numbers until I was in grad school, and that's when I learned that only 0.2% of architects were Black women at that time. And so now the number is about 0.5. So we've doubled the number of Black women architects, and it's still less than 1%.
Wow. But again, trending upwards as it should. So uh, every field, no matter what it is, really needs diversity to reflect our population in this country. So I think that's a great trend upward. But I do have some great questions from the students. This first one is Christian Mitchell. She's a junior, and she asks, as an architect, what do you think is your signature style? Do you always have to completely satisfy the clients, or can you put your personal touch on a finished product?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's actually, architecture is really humbling because when you're in school, you're fully designing everything. And I think it's a different experience sometimes than when you actually get out into practice. So I would say my signature style in general is more like clean lines, tend to be more modern. I like materials like wood and concrete. Um, and in practice, I've done a lot more work on the back end and working on like the construction documents and working on feasibility studies, which is way, way early. And so kind of both ends of the spectrum, really early in the project and more in like the development part of the project than like the design portion. But I will say a lot of the design is led by the client. You can give ideas all day, but whatever they want to go with is kind of the direction you're leading in. So the trick there is to make sure that you put out ideas that you actually want to design, so that they aren't choosing something that you get stuck with and don't actually like.
And that they can afford, because the budget, at the end of the day, the bottom line is the most important part.
Huge.
Now, this is Rashawn Smith. He's a sophomore, and he asks, what was your biggest inspiration to become an architect?
Oh, I've always loved drawing and math. And so I thought in my mind that I came up with this idea on my own just to find out that my great grandfather was a builder. And
Wow.
so I think it was actually, somewhere like instilled in me, like, back in my genes. But I really think it was drawing. And so in high school, I had um, a career project in English class. And that's when I started doing some research and when I was looking at architecture and just kind of the technical parts of it, how it combines with the art. That's what got me interested in pursuing it.
Let me see here. Oh, another great question. This is Michaela Davis. She's a junior, and she asked, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
To get a mentor. I did not have a mentor until I would say grad school. I was just, nervous, not knowing what I didn't even know I needed one, I guess, at the time. And, sometimes you think your work isn't good enough, or you're taking time away from this professional. People want to mentor you. They want to be there for you. They want to help make your path easier than theirs was. And so I think if I had a mentor earlier on, I could have gone further faster. And that would be my greatest
Yeah,
advice.
and that would be true in whatever field these kids decide to do. It's especially in these fields that need more diversity. The people that were trailblazers don't want their work to go to waste. So that is a great
No.
point. People that have put forth the time and the effort and the blood and the sweat, they want somebody to carry on their legacy. This is Dakayla Williamson, one of our cheerleaders here. She's in ninth grade, and she asks, "How long does it normally take to come up with a design?"
Oh, quickly to come with the design. A good one takes a little bit longer. So I would say it depends on the phase of the project, but when you're starting out, they say not to spend too much time on it. The best practice is to get down as many rough ideas as you can. So if that's 5-minute sketches, then just do 5-minute sketches or 2-minute sketches, and then see which ones you kind of like and develop those more. And so over time, that's a good way to kind of distill your design process.
All right, I've got two more from the students. This is Rashunta Pierce. She's one of our basketball players here. She's a ninth grader, and she asked, "What expectations do you have of yourself as an architect?"
Um, Perfection. No, I'm just kidding. So nothing is ever going to be perfect. And so my expectation is to just try to keep getting better. Try to learn more. I think every architect wants their next set of drawings to be better than their last. And so we start out with a project, particularly if you have newer architects on your team or newer designers that may just be like right out of school. You tell them to look at the last project we did and start there. So that'll show you what level of detailing you need to do for each design submittal package. So we have different submittals we do. So the first one is schematic design, which is early on, and then design development, where we have a little more decisions made, and then construction documents where we're like, okay, no more, no more changes. And so kind of at each of those points, you want to have a better set of drawings. And so that's what we aim for. That's what I aim for.
I've got one more from the students. This is Zakiya Jackson, and she's a ninth grader as well. And she asked, "Can you describe a situation where you've made a bad decision in a design?"
Yes. So one of my first projects, the first one that was ever built, um, on my construction documents, I did not coordinate the lighting at the entry canopy with electrical. And so our lights were slightly off from one another, and they weren't, and neither of us had dimensions. And so it was kind of like, pointing at each other.
Oh
And
wow!
so you would typically, what you would expect to happen in that scenario, what you would want to happen is the subcontractor or the contractor to call you and say, hey, this doesn't look right on the drawings. This is what's getting installed next. Would you like to submit like a revision? But that didn't happen. So we get out to the site and these lights are installed
Oh
kind of
man!
zigzag, and they had to come out. We had to, do the sketch, dimension it, and then be replaced. So decisions do have financial implications.
Yeah,
Um,
but that's also a good point because one thing that we struggle with as teachers is that these kids are like they don't get it right the first time. Oh, this is too hard. I quit, and that it doesn't happen like that, especially in construction. I mean, I'm sure you have draft after draft after draft because, but like we said before, the shovel goes in the ground, the design has to be perfect. Now it's not going to be perfect the first time, but people are spending a lot of money, and it has to be that way. So that's a great point. There is a lot of trial and error. But obviously it can be done. Now, we're almost out of time, and we thank you so much again for joining us. I'm just always blown away at your knowledge and your skills. But obviously, this is Black History Month, and what a I can't think of a better person in a fast growing field to join us that's really moving the needle. Obviously, like you said, it's still just 0.5 of all architects in the United States are Black females, and even though that number has doubled, it's still too low. So Cary, and actually one of my good friends is from Cary in Cary, North Carolina now as a police officer. So that's kind of cool. But you grew up as a young Black girl. You're not much older than these kids. And you went to two great universities, and you're really making your mark in a field that desperately needs these young people to think about being a part of it. So what can they do to follow in your footsteps? And if they don't want to be an architect, what can they do to match your success as someone that looks just like them?
I would say, even if you're not sure what you want to do, just start trying things out. And so, learning more about different career fields you might be interested in, going to camps, and finding ones that that match your interests, but also if you want to try a lot of different ones, aren't going to break the bank at the same time, and they exist. And so I said something about like finding a mentor. It's sometimes not easy, but you can ask someone if they know someone, and that often can lead to somebody down the road. YouTube, I didn't have YouTube like you all have YouTube now, so you can find almost anything, and start learning about it there for free. And so I think that's a great way to start gaining some experience.
Well, the experience is one thing you have, and it's just amazing all the things you're doing with so many more great things to come. So again, thank you for making some time for us today. It's just always such a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
I'm just one of our best guests we have the entire school year. So thank you so much. Zakiya Wiggins, all the way from Raleigh,
Thank
North
you.
Carolina, architect extraordinaire. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. Y'all have a great day.
All right, talk to you soon, my friend.
Bye.
See ya.